interesting about how things change here in Georgetown over the years. You look about 5 feet down from the top of that wall, that is where the young man fell from. Over the years, the market up on top has been raised up 13.5 feet. And when they raised the market up, they added about another 5 feet of wall. So when that young man fell, he fell from where the stones change down onto the plaza and then fell into the canal. I will look and say, well, I'm sure that's more than 15 feet. I'm going to come out of character for 1 second because last week I forgot to take my hat off. I've been looking up in the trees because a couple weeks ago there was about a 4 or 5 foot long rat snake. They're not poisonous, but he was big, and he was in this mimosa tree over here.
Oh my God!
So last week I said, I'm looking at this for a snake in the trees, and all the visitors were saying, yeah, what's the punchline? And I said, there was a snake in the tree. So if you see me sort of glancing around,
we talked about the canal thing yesterday, so I think he was on the other side.
Yeah, he was up on that plaza yesterday, okay? So I just want to let you all know that if you see me sort of distracted, it's because I'm always looking for our friend the rat snake, okay? Now, back to Ernest. Right here in the shadow of Henry Foxhall's mansion and Francis Scott Key's mansion, which sat just up the way a little bit, the hustle and bustle of Georgetown began to give way to the more rural and rustic area of the countryside and the canal, but not without their own problems. Over here, sort of in Henry Foxhall's backyard, is an area known as Boston, an area south of Great Street, but east of High Street, comprised of 3 notorious neighborhoods: Hungry Hill, Paradise Flats, and Frog Island. Henry Foxhall's home has fallen into disrepair, as you can see, and is now affectionately known as the Buzzard's Roost. It is a notorious flophouse. Now up on Frederick Street here, at 2nd, right up at the top of the hill, William Washington was struck by Oliver May with a hoe. The doctor said that his skull was cleaved almost in half. However, he's expected to make a full recovery. There's a very sad case of the Lee brothers. They lived on Frederick Street, where it intersects with High Street, almost a half a mile up Frederick Street. For years, their family had had an old musket hanging on the wall. For years, these 2 young men had played with the musket and nothing had come of it. Now they're in their 20s now and had no reason to believe that the musket was anything other than a memento hanging on the wall. Unfortunately, Frank came in one day, grabbed the musket and pointed it at his brother, Theodore, pulled the trigger, and the blast hit Theodore right in the chest. He ran to his brother, who said, "Oh, I'm gone," and died. Jerry Donovan was beaten to death by Daniel McCarthy for reasons unknown. Now, Jerry's wife was out there pleading with Daniel to stop this beating from occurring. They lived up here at 2nd and Lincoln Street, right on the edge of Georgetown College, Georgetown College's campus. She begged and begged him to stop. When he had finished, he ran off and is still at large. Now, also up on Frederick Street, there was a domestic tragedy. Isaac Bell and his wife Ann got into a dispute over a cigarette, over tobacco products. Isaac slapped Ann with his open hand and knocked her on the bed, and she fell dead. So Isaac is now awaiting his just desserts in the district station house. There were other accidents involving guns with children being shot, and I don't think we need to belabor that. Let's step up onto the Frederick Street Bridge. Other pedestrians and all can cross. Is everyone comfortable there? No one has fear of bridges or anything? Well, this bridge tends to remain better maintained than some of our other pedestrian bridges in Georgetown. However, indifference to the maintenance of structures like this bridge here, or our aqueduct bridge that carried the canal over the Potomac River, did not just stop with the indifference of the maintenance of our structures. There was indifference towards people, towards people's co-workers, and towards their employees. Now, the aqueduct bridge, which is just beyond that bend up there, carries the C&O Canal over the Potomac River for boats that are destined to Alexandria. There is a wooden deck above the aqueduct that is able to carry people and carriages. In the last 6 months, 117,723 foot passengers crossed that bridge. 4,606 horses with riders, 18,422 wagons of all kinds, 25 head of cattle, 9,000 head of sheep, and 30 hogs, all on their way to the Drovers Market out our New Cut Road. Now, not long ago, this bridge did in fact fall into the canal when its bridge abutment was struck by a canal boat. But the repairs were made hastily because of the problems it caused in interrupting the commerce on the canal. There have been considerable complaints about all of these structures. In fact, we've received complaints about the deplorable conditions of the wooden deck of the aqueduct bridge. And you know, lo and behold, about 30 head of Gill Fear's cattle fell through some rotten planks on that bridge into the C&O Canal. And all 30 head of those cattle were rescued. And I'm sure Mr. Furr is very pleased that he suffered no losses except for a scare. There was a homicide on the canal boat A.L. Miller and the Star of Cumberland between the two captains. William Wilson struck Charles Morse with a stone during an altercation. We do not know what caused the altercation, but Mr. Morse died of his injuries. There have been several cases related to the Army Signal Corps installation over in Arlington Heights, right across the aqueduct bridge. Deserter Job Craig was over here ostensibly working on some telegraph lines when he took off running up our canal road towards the chain bridge. Several shots were fired at him by military personnel, but he seemed to elude them and is still on the lam. Now, one night, 3 fellows from the Signal Corps were walking across the aqueduct bridge when Enoch Barkus, for some unknown reason, flung himself off the bridge into the Potomac River below. His body was recovered several days later. Now, many of these boatmen led very quiet lives and were very respectful of each other, but there are some that will take advantage of people, of young men and young women, some of them too sick to work. And what they will do is they put them off before their boats get to Georgetown and leave these young folks to fend for themselves. Often, Dr. Kleinschmidt or Dr. Brown examine them and provide any treatment they may receive, and then they're off to the almshouse. Not all are here under those circumstances. There was a young man, Charles Smith Aiken. He had taken up work on one of the canal boats because his father had had him withdrawn from Manhattan College. And to show his father, he ran away and joined a canal boat crew. Drownings continued on the canal and in the Potomac River. There were great water plumes that flowed out of the aqueduct into the Potomac River below. 3 boys in a rowboat were rowing under those water plumes. They panicked when the water cascaded into their boat, and all 3 were thrown from the boat and drowned. Canal boat captains aren't immune from accidents. Captain John Snyder was drowned in the canal when the tiller arm of his boat snapped and plunged him into the canal. You would think that he would have known how to swim. He did not. And sadly, the 6-year-old son of our own officer, Sturgis, died while swimming in a pond just about a half a mile up the canal from here. Now, John Sanders and his son, Richard, have a small farm about 6 miles out the canal road. and they became aware of something burning on their property, and they rushed down to see what it was, and what they found horrified them. There was a young lad about 14 to 15 years of age that had built a campfire to try to keep warm. The fire must have leapt to the wool pants that he was wearing, and he was consumed in flames. He was described as a white boy, about 4 feet 5 inches tall, with auburn hair. Do any of you know who this young man might be? There was a sad suicide case up at Georgetown College. Most suicides are not so not so noteworthy, but this one was particularly poignant. Young Matthew LeClaire, a student at Georgetown College, after he flung himself from his dormitory window to the ground below, our officers discovered that he had written on a picture of his mother, "Tomorrow night I will be with you, dear mother." And in another note found in his room, and I paraphrase here, he says, "There will be but one class of people who will rejoice at my death, the restaurant keeps, as they will no longer have to trust me for payment."
Oh.
Poor Matthew.
Yeah.
Now for a case which I hate to bring up because it reflects so poorly upon a member of our very own department. But this is a case of murder most foul, murder most serious. Terrible. On the night, July 15th, 1872, our own officer, Charles O'Brien, who's a mere young man of about 26 years of age, was working in his police capacity at the Green Spring Pavilion, which is just about a half a mile up Canal Road here. It's a nice, cool area, parkland, the dance pavilion. The German community of Washington uses it often for Schützenfests and Oktoberfests. Well, Charles was there on duty that night, and he came across Samuel Cunningham, 29 years of age, the brother of one of his co-workers. William Cunningham is one of our officers at the 3rd District. Samuel was with his wife, and Charlie O'Brien engaged Samuel in a conversation, alluding to the fact that Samuel had been trying to leave his job down here at Morton Mining Company. He was looking for something besides the minimum pay. Charles O'Brien had apparently referred him for a position as security officer at the High Reservoir up on High Street at Road Street, which provides drinking water to the town. Well, apparently, this only came to light later. Charles O'Brien, in engaging the Cunninghams in this conversation, said something to Mrs. Cunningham along the lines of, "Well, now that I've assisted in getting your husband a job, I will assume that there will be some favors coming my way."
Oh, yeah, right.
With that, Samuel Cunningham hauled off and slugged with his fist Officer O'Brien. Lieutenant Sturgis, our district commander, was nearby. He ran in and broke up the fracas, took Officer O'Brien's nightstick and badge away from him, relieved him of duty, and sent him up to the pavilion porch of Green Spring to compose himself. Not 10 minutes later, the Cunninghams were walking arm in arm back from a dance when over Mrs. Cunningham's shoulder there was lowered a pistol by Officer O'Brien, who fired 2 shots into the back of Samuel Cunningham's head. He was charged with murder, and we will find out the outcome of his trial later on in our walk. Now we're going to proceed up through Caddy's Alley and past some of our older structures, and we're going to stop at the back of the marketplace, all where the young man left from. Now the marketplace here, of course, provided an opportunity for people to bring vegetables and produce and meats to sell here in Georgetown, just as the fish market over there provided the same for all of our freshly caught seafood. But it also provided a place for people to meet, gossip, wool gather, and exchange news. It's also, of course, another venue and opportunity for crime. Officer Sebastian was assaulted while arresting William Williams and James Parker. Officer Green came to his assistance and subdued both subjects. There was a reckless rider on Bridge Street. 19-year-old J.H. Kaiser was arrested by officers Jones and Harper for furiously riding his horse along Bridge Street. He must have been somewhat of a spoiled soul, because in the station house, his tears and protests were about the indignity of being arrested by a lot as lowly as the police. I call your attention to the poor condition of the stairs over here on the Potomac Street Bridge. Many people have declared it a death trap. Poor little Willie Wallace, a canal boatman's son, was burned to death in a house fire up Congress Street, up Market Street at 2nd Street. When they found him and the firemen from the Vigilant Firehouse got there, they found him huddled in the corner of his room, burned to a crisp. Now there was a shooting affray. William Nicholson shot Henry Hutchins after the two were gambling. Nicholson pursued Hutchins, who turned and drew a pistol on him and said, "If you take one more step, I'll shoot." Well, you can imagine, the bullet struck Mr. Hutchins in the mouth and lodged in his neck. Dr. Kleinschmidt, who examined him at Cropley's store, Dr. Modesto Williams, did not regard the wound as fatal, but he subsequently died next week. We'll hear more about this later. There was a robbery of a butcher's stall. John Williams grabbed a bundle of sausages and ran, pursued down the street by Sergeant Hess. You remember Sergeant Hess is the one that rescued the young lad who fell into the canal. But he pursued this gentleman all the way into the canal with the bundle of sausages, retrieved the gentleman and the sausages. James Taylor was a miscreant who was hard to take down. It took two of our officers, ultimately 3. He had been over at Dennis Caddy's store and got in an altercation. Lieutenant Skipper and station logkeeper, a civilian employee of ours, tried to take Mr. Taylor into custody. He put up such a fight that eventually he was subdued when Officer Harper arrived. They said by the time he got to the station house, nearly all of his clothes had been ripped from him. Now here's an update on our former co-worker, Charlie O'Brien. He was found guilty of murder by a jury after 4 hours of deliberation on November 14, 1872. On November 29th, Judge MacArthur sentenced him to death, to die by hanging, and set his execution date for February 27, 1873. Lieutenant Essex, who was our station commander, who failed to think ahead and take the gun away from Officer O'Brien, ever since that incident, he came under so much criticism that he was assigned to another job at police headquarters downtown in the sanitary division because of his case of nerves resulting from his case. So with that, we're going to return to the 3rd Police District Station and the end of our walk and finish out our tour there. Reported that he is lying near death at his home up on Gay Street. The 3rd District Station House. Just as accounts of cruelty, hardship, criminality among the canal boatmen represented but a small portion of the 500 boats that plied the canal, these instances that I've called to your attention today represent just the seamier side of life here in Georgetown, and certainly does not reflect poorly upon our 12,500 citizens that otherwise live a nice, peaceful life here in our small village. Isaac Bell, he slapped his wife Ann, who fell over dead on the bed. He was released when the coroner's jury determined that his wife had died of natural causes unrelated to being struck. So Isaac is a free man. Daniel McCarthy, who you'll recall was beating Jerry Donovan to death, he's still on the lam. The case against William Nicholson, who turned and pointed his gun at Hillary Hutchins after their gambling dispute, was determined by the coroner's jury to be a matter of self-defense, and he is now a free man. Lieutenant Essex succumbed to consumption at his residence at the age of 45, leaving 4 children to mourn his passing. Officer William Cunningham, the brother of Samuel Cunningham, the victim of Charlie O'Brien's dastardly deed, he was seriously injured when he was thrown from a wagon on Bridge Street. He's expected to make a full recovery, but he did have a broken arm and some severe bruising to his head. Charlie O'Brien's request for a new trial was denied on February 4th, 1873. On February 21st, President Ulysses S. Grant granted a stay of execution until after his inauguration in March. On March 28th, President Grant commuted O'Brien's sentence to life in prison. You see, O'Brien had served under General Butler in the Union Army, and General Sherman and Butler both wrote letters of appeal on his behalf to the Attorney General and to President Grant. On March 31st, he was taken by train to the federal penitentiary in Albany, New York. Now, what about Ernest W. Brown? Ernest W. Brown went on to a rather fascinating career. In 1906, he was promoted to sergeant and was transferred to the vice squad. In 1917, he was promoted to lieutenant. Remember, he just started in 1896. 1917 to lieutenant. In 1920 to captain. He was promoted to inspector and put in charge of the traffic division. See, I told you there's going to be problems with those velocipedes and all. Okay? In 1925. In 1932, he was promoted to major superintendent of police. He was the first Metropolitan Police Department police chief to rise up through the ranks all the way from being a patrolman. All the other police chiefs in the history of the Metropolitan Police Department prior to him had been appointed by the city commissioners. He was very instrumental in starting the Police Boys and Girls Club, and Camp Ernest W. Brown down on the Potomac River down in suburban Maryland is named after him. He gave that interview in 1960 to Jay Johnson, and I believe he passed away in 1966. So he lived quite a long, long life after he retired in 1941.
Wow.
So Ernest had quite a career to speak of, and it's been my pleasure to use him as a vehicle to tell you all about what was going on here in Georgetown during that decade of the 1870s when the canal was at its height of prosperity, to give you just a sense of what was going on. And I think just from that selection of stories, you'll see that in a way things weren't so much different back then, you know, as they are today. They had equine epizootic and rabies. We have SARS. We have monkeypox. I mean, you know, everything's the same as it was. So, you know, I'm sure that people back then distanced themselves from the past, thinking they were very sophisticated, and, you know, and of course we've got all of our technology and all to help us along. But in terms of human interest and the way people treat each other, we're not all that different. So I appreciate you all joining me today. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them for you.
The policeman earned?
Policemen back in the 1870s earned $480 a year. A police sergeant a year.
And a
police
chicken costs
sergeant.
$25?
Huh?
And the chicken cost $25?
No, that was 10 chickens.
10 chickens. One chicken.
The police sergeant earned $600 a year, and I believe the superintendent of police only made about $1,400 a year.
Did they work every day? Did they have days off?
They had a rotating schedule that they worked off. But as I said, you know, they started out with just 17 officers and one sergeant here. And the Metropolitan Police Department was formed in 1861. And actually, the only thing in my get-up is a commemorative belt buckle celebrating their 125th anniversary in 1986, which I sort of put on in tribute to the DC Police Department. So that's it.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad you all joined us.